Pubco Studios in Oklahoma City. You're watching the Press Row. I'm Jenny Carlson here with Barry Trammell, and we are brought to you by Papa John's Pizza. You can go online to papajohns.com and order your pizza anytime. It's time for Inbox, Barry. We've got email questions we answer here on video. Let's get to it with Eli. He says, what do you predict for OU's quarterback situation next year? Would Cody Thomas be a better fit, or is Baker Mayfield the guy? Never mind, I guess, according to Eli, that Trevor Knight returns next year.
I actually think it's a solid question in terms of Baker Mayfield. I don't think Cody Thomas is going to beat out Trevor Knight. And I think Trevor Knight's going to be the guy. If you notice, he's actually playing better. He's made a couple of bad decisions each of the last two games, but his accuracy is way up in recent games. He's throwing the ball much better, and that's all you really ever wanted out of Trevor Knight. I think he's starting to come into be closer to that quarterback we saw against Alabama. But those decisions have to improve. You can't throw the ball to the other team twice a game. Baker Mayfield, we know, is a good, solid quarterback. We saw that in Lubbock last year. So I think Baker Mayfield has a chance to win the job next year, but my money's on Trevor Knight.
A couple things come to mind. First of all, Baker Mayfield, he might have been good against the Sooners last year, and he was good in the spring game this last spring. But if you look at his total resume of work last year for Texas Tech, he threw a lot more interceptions in Big 12 play than he threw touchdown passes. So let's slow our roll a little bit on Baker Mayfield. I think he could be really good, but there's also evidence that he throws the ball to the other team too often. And I think there's something else to remember. Trevor Knight, while I've been critical of him and his development, I think it was Bob Stoops earlier this week made the point that Trevor Knight has now started something like 11 or 12 games. That's essentially one season. Now, granted, it's strung over almost 2 years because he didn't start all of last year. But really, this is a guy that's just now going into essentially season 2 as a starter. So I think this is where we could really see him evolve and pick up momentum, and he has been playing better. That pick 6 against K-State, disastrous. But with the exception of that, 2 games, really good football for Trevor Knight. All right, let's go back to the inbox, and Jim says, Joe Mixon gets nothing, Adrian Peterson gets nothing. I would like to think that justice is the same for all, but it's not the case.
I have to disagree with Jim. I think Adrian Peterson and Joe Mixon, in a lot of ways, are paying a heavier price because they're football players. It's just not in the court of law. It's in the court of public opinion. And I think that's where the serious ramifications come for these two guys. I think they're hit with a stigma. I think they're hit with a reputation that's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to overcome. So, the legal system is full of plea agreements. It's full of compromise. You see this happen all the time with a variety of situations. This happens all the time. We just don't pay attention because it's names we don't know and people we don't care about. Joe Mixon and Adrian Peterson are going to pay a heavy price for their crimes.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think it is probably a heavier price outside the court of law because when you look at, Adrian Peterson reaches that plea deal just a day or so ago, and $4,000 fine, I think it was. To Adrian Peterson, that's nothing. Obviously, if Joe Mixon were paying $4,000, well, then that's a little different. But for Adrian Peterson, monetarily, those sorts of things, not a problem. But I think with the, look at what Adrian Peterson had done in terms of endorsement deals. Some of the inroads he'd made and some of the companies he was representing. Those things disappear. And just how people view him now. How do teams view him? Who's he gonna play for when this contract is up with the Vikings? Lots of big questions out there, and I think some of those, if Joe Mixon develops to that point of being an NFL caliber back, I think those will follow him as well. Lots of hangover from both of these situations for both of those guys. All right, back to the inbox, and Diane says, glad that game is over, that K-State game. Still love those Pokes, but it's hard to watch them struggle. Barry, what about OSU football right now?
Well, I sort of appreciate what Diane says about that K-State game. You were there. I got to watch the game, actually got to watch all I wanted, which I sort of lost interest after about 2.5 quarters. But it reminds me of the Calvinists, the people that believe in predestination. You know what the Calvinist said when he fell down the stairs? He said, glad that's over with. The K-State game, sort of the same way. Glad that's over with. Here comes Baylor in a couple of weeks, the Bedlam game. It's not really a question of what's going to happen. It's a question of getting it over with.
Yeah.
So, the Cowboys season has just become and maybe not a disaster, but just sort of a dud. So, it is tough to watch, especially an offense that had such a national reputation that is now so bad, ranking probably is probably the 9th best offense in the Big 12, ahead of only Kansas. So it is tough to watch, and the season is limping towards the close.
Yeah, definitely so. And I was there at that K-State game, and the game started with so much promise. That offense moved right down the field, 8 plays, just took it to K-State. And then the kickoff return, and I think it really turned the momentum. This is an OSU team that mentally I think is really fragile. They, I think that they saw that as, hey, maybe we're moving in the right direction. The defense had to think, this is great, this is fantastic. And when things turned, and then K-State adjusted defensively, the Cowboys just never could recover from that sort of change in momentum. And, it's unfortunate, too, because Mike Gundy was asked after the game from our very own Kyle Fredrickson about some of the talk going on in social media from fans and how hard this is. And Gundy essentially dismissed it because it's social media. I wish he would have taken a different tack, because while it is social media and it does have its vices, those are still people, and they're largely still fans. They're Cowboy fans that are paying to go, and they're largely Cowboy fans we've seen over the years, through thick and thin, stay with the Cowboys. They're just hurting right now, and they want some reassurance that someday it's going to get better. And right now, I'm not sure there are a lot of reassurances, unfortunately. All right, back to the inbox from Gary. Says, I may be silly, but I feel a little more secure when Gran Torino, that's your name for Mr. Kendrick Perkins, is in the game. I think Steven Adams should start, but it's nice to have Perk around. Hey, has Kendrick Perkins turned a corner?
Well, I don't know if he did. He sort of turned it back last night. I thought he didn't play well at all in Toronto. But it is nice to have Perkins around. I think Scotty Brooks, of course, nothing's going right now with this depleted roster. You can't pay much of attention to anything. But I think it is a good plan to have Steven Adams as the starting center, playing 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes a game, and have Perk in reserve to shore up the defense at times, provide veteran leadership. And, of course, Perk was excellent offensively against Denver on Saturday night in that emotional win. So, it's nice to have Perk around. I agree, but I think Scotty Brooks has made the right move, forging into the future with Steven Adams as the starting center.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But I tell you what, this is sort of an unintended consequence, I think, of all these injuries, is maybe some appreciation of Kendrick Perkins that wasn't there before from a lot of Thunder fans. He's not going to be an offensive juggernaut, those 17 points or whatever he had against Denver. That's not going to be a norm. But this guy brings talent to the table, especially on the defensive end. He's great to have down low against those bigs. And I tell you, I think it's going to be interesting to see, once the Thunder's back at full strength, that day will come. I have little doubt, although it does feel like it's going to be longer than expected. It'll be interesting to see sort of how does the rotation work? What games does Kendrick Perkins use more than others? It's going to be fascinating, but it's going to be a while before we get to that point, because in Toronto, Kendrick Perkins was the only bench player they had left. Hey, be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoma.